Age before beauty, Aidan. I have to find which is my right side of the microphone. Josie Geoghan never noticed herself checking the stomachs of the ladies who came to see Nurse Cadden until she overheard the woman in red gloves accusing her of staring. Hardly a surprise if she did. When they stood on the doorstep of the Rathmines' house, letting her guess the reason for their visit. And she, barely finished with Sister Dimphna, but very pleased to be in Dublin and in charge of opening the door to visitors for the clinic. "I'm here to have me dandruff treated," a woman might mutter, while Josie held the opened basement door. Or, "Does the nurse do warts?" The braver ones would mouth, "Women's trouble," while only a rare brazen thing would push the door in on Josie without a glance back up the basement area steps to see if anyone was watching. And why would Josie not check for signs that she had warts or dandruff or women's trouble? And Josie herself standing in the waiting room, helpless, looking as if it was she that should know what was to be done. "I'm not Nurse Cadden, you know, but Nurse Cadden's assistant," she would say, although her assistance was mostly provided outside the treatment room. She was in charge of the front door, the waiting room, and the kitchen to make a cup of tea for the ladies when their treatment was finished. Or earlier sometimes, if Nurse Cadden decided. But she wasn't a parlour maid. And the woman with the red gloves shouldn't have called her that. She was a trainee midwife. Nurse Cadden had promised to get her into the maternity hospital to start proper training. And in the meanwhile, she could help out with her visitors. Nurse Cadden was good to her. She liked being her assistant. Josie had shown the woman in red gloves into the waiting room, invited her to sit down on one of the comfortable chairs, and pointed at the magazines. But the woman ignored the chairs. She stood with her coat open, pulling at each fingertip on the left hand in turn, before sweeping the red leather off in the whip and starting on the other glove. All the while looking at Josie instead of at her hands, as if Josie was a naughty schoolgirl, and she the Reverend Mother waiting for an explanation. It was she who wanted the service. So it would be natural for Josie to give an involuntary glance up and down the open overcoat for a suggestion as to why she wanted to see Nurse. "Your parlour maid was staring at me," the woman said to Nurse Cadden before Josie had closed the door of the ground floor treatment room. "Far too cheeky for her place." She squeezed her red gloves together in one hand and empty fingers wagging as she spoke. After that, Josie made sure to look at every visitor's stomach. Not immediately the hall door was opened, because coats covered a multitude. And sometimes a woman would hesitate over her coat, and Josie would have to step forward and say, "Nurse Cadden can't see you with that on now, can she?" and help with buttons before allowing her eyes to sweep downwards. "You're not showing yet, thank God," caused one or two women to burst into tears, but mostly it was flattening hands to smooth the stomachs. "I think you're too far gone," she told a mousy woman wearing a corset and gave her a little poke under the ribcage. Then she swept the woman's coat off and flung it into a chair. After some visitors, Nurse Cadden would say, "The sheet in the treatment room needs changing." And right enough, there would be blood or other stains. And Josie would steep the sheet in cold water for a little while before boiling it in a big pot over the Rayburn, having already mopped the lino clean of any drips. Her favourite job was bringing the instruments and the white enamel bowls down to the kitchen to boil. It was a cold, late winter's afternoon the first time Nurse Cadden came into the kitchen and asked Josie to open the burner door. She held a paper bag out in front of herself and pushed it on top of the hot coals. The smell from the Rayburn was usually no worse than burnt eggshells, and only noticeable if Josie had let the fire die down, and the wetness and the size of the bag overwhelmed the coals, forcing smoke out of the burner into the kitchen to make Josie cough and to fleck any clothes drying on the line in the back area with black smuts. After she closed the door, and while the woman in red gloves was being examined, she'd waited, listening, and heard the woman say, "Those don't look very clean. I could get an infection from dirty instruments. The ungrateful bitch."
Thank you.